Between 1870 and 1950, thousands of American men and women were victims of racial violence, in many cases lynched in public events attended by thousands solely because of the color of their skin. Last week, a powerful tribute to these victims, their legacies, and the terror of this time opened to the public. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice, set on 6 acres, the memorial includes 800 6-foot-tall monuments symbolizing each county in the U.S. where lynchings took place and a grave with the names of each known victim. But for many descendants of these men and women, the lives they lived and the real stories behind their murders remained a mystery, like the family of Len Shaw, who was lynched in Georgia at the age of 42 after he was accused of harassing a group of white women. But when his grandson wanted to find out the real story, he went to the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project at Boston's Northeastern University Law School. They started digging and found out that Shaw, in fact, may have been targeted because he was a hard-working farmer who was starting to accumulate more property and money. And in fact, mobs had tried to lynch him twice before. He is just one of about 500 such cases the organization has documented, uncovering the real stories behind these murders and putting them all online for the world to see. I'm joined now by the two people behind this effort, Northeastern University Law Professor Margaret Burnham. Good to see you.
Good to see you,
and
Jim.
Dean of the School of Humanities, Arts and Sciences at MIT, where she also teaches political science, Melissa Nobles. Melissa, thanks for being here, too. You started your work at your center long before this thing in Montgomery was conceived of, and it was clearly not just an exercise in history. It was more. What was the original goal there?
The original goal was actually to uncover the history and then to return the cases to the communities where they came from, so that they could deal with them, so that they could make an accounting for themselves of what happened and what the consequences are and what the meaning is for them today. So our project is has two parts. One is the research, and Melissa and I together, along with a number of other scholars, are uncovering material that was not known before we got into the field. And then the second half of it is, okay, now we've collected the material. What are we going to do with it? How can we share it with communities? How can they make sense of it? How can they use it to improve their own understanding of history?
Why does it matter that we, not just the families, that I understand, why does it matter that we know this history, that we know the truth?
Well, we see it as an opportunity to really retell the history of the 20th century. When we think about the 20th century, it has an arc that goes something like this. Late 19th century, ending of slavery, Jim Crow segregation into the mid-1950s, 1960s. We have the Civil Rights Movement. 40 years later, then we have the election of President Obama. And it's a story that's largely about, that focuses on political disenfranchisement, blacks not voting and such. But what isn't as well understood is the violence that has been a part of that history from the very beginning. And that's the importance of it. So we can get a better sense of how violent the mid-20th century was.
But the arc that you described, you stopped with Barack Obama. But I would assume the arc continues into Sanford, Florida, and Ferguson, and
all
Staten
of that.
Island.
Of course.
Is that how
exactly.
you approach this?
Precisely. In part because as important as the election of Barack Obama was, it also, at the same time that he was president, we still had this violence happening, which shows that the level of violence in American society, particularly racially motivated violence, has in certain ways continued throughout.
And what's restorative justice, and what role does it play once you do the truth finding and then, as you say, share it with the community for an account? What does that mean?
Well, so Jim, it's not just enough to uncover the facts and to put the files together. That's really important. It's recovering our history, and it's also important. I'm at a law school. It teaches law students a lot about the law. But equally important is to share that with the parties for whom it matters the most. And those parties are the family members and the communities where these events took place. Silence, generally, is the operative term for these stories, both in families and within communities.
And what might they choose to do with it?
They choose to, first of all, come together around the stories, across difference in communities. They may choose to seek apologies from governmental officials. We've had a number of cases in which mayors and police chiefs have stepped forward and said, look, this happened. It happened years ago, but it's one department and it's our responsibility. They may rename a street. They may come together. Last week we had an event in Louisiana in which there was a second line and a celebration, a commemoration. So it's about marking the person's life and the meaning of that person's life in that community, because otherwise their silence is actually, these people have not been recognized.
Can we go back just for a minute? Well, I mentioned Lynn Shaw for a minute. The purpose of these murders went beyond that individual or that family who they were murdering. The goal, when you see these crowds in some of these photographs with thousands of men, women, and children witnessing this thing as if it's a sporting event, the goal was obviously to send a message not just to that person they were executing, but to every black person in that community. It was terrorism, essentially.
Exactly,
yes?
exactly. It was exactly terroristic. It was sending two signals. One was to the black community that if you get out of line or if you seek to achieve, this is what will happen to you. And for whites, it served as a way of bonding, right? No one in those pictures is covering their faces.
No, it's totally
right?
true, because we all I expected
right.
Klansmen with things over their heads.
So it also indicates, by the lack of any kind of disguise, impunity. They don't think that they're going to be punished for their acts.
Because in most cases, virtually all cases, they would not be.
Precisely.
You know, one of the things, my embarrassment I'll put on the table right now, when I read about the stuff you did, went to your website, read about some of these cases, I am embarrassed about how little I know about this history. When I saw some of the photographs that Oprah Winfrey put on 60 Minutes around the opening of this museum, you know, again, as I said before, I thought it was Klansmen for the most part. I learned so little, which led me to conclude, maybe this is just to let myself off the hook. We don't educate. I mean, we educate our kids a lot about terror and horror that happens beyond our borders,
Precisely.
but don't do much educating about the same things that happen here. It seems to me that's not just in individual cases, Margaret, but that's a huge part of the way you two and people like you succeed, right? By everybody learning.
Essentially, yes. So first of all, we're introducing the word terror into the American lexicon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have used it beyond our shores, but by documenting, by collecting, by enumerating the cases, we're showing how widespread, how deep, and how broad this actually went. And the history has been covered up. It's been buried.
Because we're racist, or because we don't want to admit this about ourselves?
Well, both things are true. In part, it's about this idea that this is old, buried history, and we're now a reborn country in which race has less salience. But it's also true that silence pervaded these communities in which these events took place, and African Americans were found difficulty talking about them because of shame or confusion or a misunderstanding
or
about
lack of knowledge,
or a sense that these things had terrorized their families, deeply traumatized their families.
Well, one of the things about also that makes the use of the term terrorism important is that terrorism is a form of political violence. It's achieving a goal.
Right.
And part of this was to intimidate people. It was to reinforce social and economic segregation. So it wasn't just kind of wanton violence. It points, so the analogy goes to other countries. Violence is usually intended to advance a political motive, and it's been no different in the U.S.
Okay, can we end with probably the single least favorite question you two ever get, but I know some people are thinking it. I didn't own slaves. My family never owned slaves. No one in my family lynched anybody. Let's just work together, go forward for a better America. Why do we have to visit this grisly past? What do you say to those people?
Well, because part of what it means to be an American is this. We have a great history, and that history also includes these stories. So we have to wrap ourselves in the flag. It includes all of the flag and all of the stories.
Margaret, if people want to learn more about the great work you guys are doing, what's the website?
Our website is crrj.northeastern.edu.
Congratulations on your great work.
Thank you
I really
so much,
appreciate your
Jim.
time, Melissa. Good
Thank
to see
you.
Thank you so much.